بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد خير الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. And welcome to, once again, to a study of Abdurrahman ibn Jawzi's Sayyid al-Khatir. Alhamdulillah, last week we were introduced to this particular text, and as mentioned before, the title itself can be a challenge to translate, but Sayyid al-Khatir, in one sense, you can translate it as hunting for thoughts or hunting for ideas. As mentioned also before, the author of this particular work, when he wrote it down, he said the reason he wrote it was because he reflected upon so many different times. He had a passing thought, and he thought it was a very brilliant idea, and then only to forget later on what that particular idea was. He wanted to take advantage of the benefit of the wisdom that he had learned to benefit personally, or to also to share it with others, only to realize at the end that it had already passed on, right? Now, of course, I make sure that all of you can hear me. I hope that all of you can still hear me. I want to make sure that my mic was off last week, but today, alhamdulillah, we have the microphone activated. So I want to just go back a little bit and just sort of review some of the things that he mentioned in his text, and he talked about it's the question of fundamentally what is the human being distracted by, right? And so basically, he mentioned that the human nature has built within it certain things that make us gravitate towards the dunya. And the akhirah itself, the hereafter, is something outside of the body. It is something even outside of our view, because it is something that we can only see once we transition from this world into that next world. So he mentioned that when we reflect upon lectures and speeches, he called them mawa'idh, that there are two fundamental reasons why when people hear important thoughts or sort of insights, that they lose interest very quickly right after it. He said one reason was because those particular brilliant insights they come at a moment in our lives that, of course, we don't expect to hear those great insights, but it's like a whip. These ideas are like whips, and they strike us, so like just as when a whip, it strikes you, that you feel the pain when it first comes to you. But then, of course, once the pain wears off, then it's something that you can easily forget, and so you don't capitalize off of the wisdom. And then he said a second reason is because typically when we actually are benefiting from those type of things, they're happening at moments when we're not absorbed in the things that would distract us from benefiting from those particular wisdoms, that we sort of have free time, our minds are free, etc. And so there are different types of ways or different types of people who react to those type of insights. One type of person can take the wisdom and then implement it into their lives right away. And so much so that they would find it difficult to not make this a regular part of who they are. And if they do feel a moment of lapse, then they accuse themselves of hypocrisy. He said then there's a second type of person who will actually be find him that okay, sometimes that his nafs or his ego as person, that oneself will incline towards heedlessness sometimes. So this is an individual similar to where he calls it like a stalk, right? So like a wheat stalk, when the wind blows it, it leans in one particular direction, right? So this individual is sometimes, of course, able to implement the wisdom. Other times he's not able to implement the wisdom. And then he has then he mentioned a third type of person, which is a person who pretty much is when the wisdom itself doesn't benefit that person at all, that person is like a smooth rock. Like water will be poured on that water, that rock, and it sort of slides right off. It slides right off. Now, one thing he mentioned before is that, that one of the reasons for this as well is that the human soul can be compared to running water, or water that flows, the flowing water. And so the nature of water is that water, it flows downhill. It is actually follows the force of gravity. So when you're trying to become a better person, that itself requires a certain degree of effort in order for you to climb back up the hill, right, so to speak, right? So understanding our nature is extremely important when it comes to these things. But then he also dealt with the question of considering the consequences of our actions long term, but trying to consider those things of what might be the consequences of the things that we do short term. So even before we do those things, and there's a great benefit in that. And so here where he says, "Man ayana bi'ayni basiratihi tanahi al-umuri fi bidayatiha qala nala khayraha wa naja min sharriha," that whoever is able to see with the eye of basira, or rather the inner eye, the eye of deep insight, what the ends of matters shall be at their beginnings, then one shall be able to achieve the good of those things and will be spared from the evil of those things. وَمَا لَمْ يَرَ الْعَوَاقِبِ غَلَبَ عَلَيْهِ الْحِسُّ فَعَادَ عَلَيْهِ بِالْأَلَمِ مَا طَلَبَ مِنْهُ السَّلَامَةَ وَبِالنَّصَبِ مَا رَجَى مِنْهُ الرَّاحَةَ. And whoever does not see the consequences or the ends of his actions, then one's sensory sort of your senses will gain mastery over you, and it will lead to pain, right, where in places where you are seeking safety, and it will lead to fatigue in places where you're seeking comfort from. وبيان هذا في المستقبل يتبين بذكر الماضي. Then he goes on and says, in order to understand this, or the clarification of this, it results when one considers what happens in the past. So you think about this in the future. What will things be in the future? Well, that what will be in the future when you just reflect upon what happens in the past of your own life. And he mentions, for instance, that, well, naturally, a person, all of us have disobeyed the laws. And we have all obeyed a law at some particular times in our lives. And when we obeyed the law, there was a certain type of fatigue that came in obeying Allah, and there was a certain type of pleasure that came in disobeying Allah. But when we think about now, we don't experience either the fatigue nor the pleasure that comes with obedience or disobedience, right? So that's the case, and we should know that this is the nature of such things. And so he says, but disobedience itself can leave an impression. So that's an impression on the person, that it becomes very difficult for a person to let go of those things, or even when one wants to let go of certain vice, you are unable to do so, because they have become such a second nature to who you are. And so that's when he says, فَلَيْتَ الذَّنُوبَ إِذَا تَخَلَّتْ خَلَّتْ. That a poet said, or as this line says, or this wisdom, it said, I wish that when sins actually are removed, that they leave alone, right? In other words, that when sins are removed, that they don't leave a mark that lingers on the human heart. وأزيدك في هذا بيانا مثل ساعة الموت وانظر إلى مرارة الحسرات على التفريط ولا أقول كيف تغلب حلاوة اللذات لأن حلاوة اللذات استحالت حنظرا فبقيت مرارة الأسى بلا مقام. So it goes on and says that, well, once we all died, at that particular point, of course, naturally, one, I could say, look at the bitterness of the regret that results from your negligence from taking part in the good deeds that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has encouraged us to do. And he says, I don't say that so that say how you can conquer the weakness. Conquer the sweetness of the delights, because the sweetness of delights has now transformed into a bitter taste. So nothing remains other than the bitterness of regret. and there's nothing to resist what that state is. Anyway, just kind of a summary of some of the things we covered so far. And so we did start this next section Wednesday, but we didn't complete it. So let's see if we can complete it and then move beyond it as well. So Abdurrahman ibn Jawzi rahimahullah, he says, فصل في أن الحياة الدنيا متاع غرور. The life of this world, or the lower life, is a delight of delusion, right? In other words, that the things that you take and the enjoyment that you have in this life is an illusory type of delight. Largely, of course, because they're not permanent. They come and they go. And so من تفكر في أواقف الدنيا أخذ الحذر ومن أيقن بطول الطريق تأهب السفر. So whoever thinks about the ends or the ends or the consequences of this life, that person shall take precautions. And who is certain of the elongation, or rather, whoever is certain that the path is long, shall take provisions in preparation for the journey. وما أعجب أمرك يا من يوقن بأمر ثم ينساه يتحقق ضرر حال ثم يغشاه وتخشى الناس والله أحق أن تخشاه. It said, and how amazing is your affair, oh, you who is certain of a matter and then forgets it, and you are realize the harm of a situation, but then you let that harm overcome you. And then you also fear people when Allah is more entitled or more deserving of being feared, right? And of course, what he talks about, what he means by the matter which you're certain of, is death shall come. But we forget it. And of course, we try to forget death, right? But death shall come to all of us. And then other times we know that something's going to be harmful, but we still indulge in it, despite the fact that we know it's going to be harmful. So he says, تَغْلِبُكَ نَفْسُكَ عَلَى مَا تَظُنُّ وَلَا تَغْلِبُهَا عَلى مَا تَسْتَيْقِنُ. And that's because naturally when you indulge in something wrong that you think that is going to grant you the happiness from it, a type of permanent happiness even at times. So it says your nafs, yourself, conquers you over what you think, but you're not able to conquer it over what you're certain, right? In other words, you are certain of death, but you still let your nafs overcome you or conquer you in that particular regard. In other words, it distracts you, it makes you forget about death, and so you think that you're going to get some ultimate happiness from sin, and so your nafs or your self conquers you over that particular thing. And then he says, "Ajabul ajaibi sururuka bigururik." Said most amazing of all is your happiness about your own delusion. وَسَحْوُكَ فِي لَهْوِكَ عَمَّا قَدْ خُبِئَ لَكَ. And also your heedlessness about your heedlessness in your distraction, your heedlessness in your entertainment, your distraction away from that which has been hidden away from you. So what's hidden from you, of course, is the hereafter. تُغْتَرُّ بِصَحَّتِكَ وَتَنْسَى دُنُوَ السَّقَمِ. That you are deluded by your good health and you forget about the fact that sickness is near. وَتَفْرَحُ بِعَافِيَتِكَ غَافِلًا عَنْ قُرْبِ الْأَلَمِ. That you are happy about your well-being while being negligent of the fact that pain is nearby. قَدْ أَرَاكَ مَصْرَعُ غَيْرِكَ مَصْرَعَكَ وَأَبْدَى مَضْجَعُ سِوَاكَ قَبْلَ الْمَمَاتِ مَضْجَعَكَ. And so the fact that others have fallen, that gives you or should give you a sign of your own fall. And the fact that some have passed away should give you or remind you of the fact that you shall eventually pass away as well. وَقَدْ شَغَلَكَ نَيْلُ لَذَّاتِكَ عَنْ ذِكْرِ خَرَابِ ذَاتِكَ. That your achievement of all of your pleasures has distracted you or preoccupied you from remembering that your own person shall come to an end, that it is coming to a ruin. In other words, that your body will eventually decay. It was going to grow old and become weak, right? And then it'll decay, right? So all of your entertainment, all of your pleasures, all those things are distracting you from that great reality. كأنك لم تسمع بأخبار من مضى ولم ترى في الباقين ما يصنع الدهر فإن كنت لا تدري فتلك ديارهم محا مجال الريح بعدك والقبر كم رأيت صاحب منزل ما نزل لحده حتى نزل وكم شاهدت والي قصر وليه عدوه لما عزل. It says, how often have you seen an owner of a home not enter or reside in the home until he actually has descended? In other words, there's people who build homes and they spend their lives building those homes or getting the homes in the shape that they would like for it to get. It's only to die once they've completed that task. In other words, if you think that the most important thing in life is for you to have a lavish home, have a great, nice car, there's so many people, right, who actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given so much good to that they're not able to enjoy those things, right? It says, it's how many times have we seen the governor of a palace, right, or the person who actually lives in a palace, only to have it taken away by his enemy, right, once he himself is removed from power. Right. So in the same fashion, right. So these are things that are not permanent, So basically his point is that that one should be striving for that which is guaranteeing ultimate happiness, right? Pursuing the dunya is not going to grant you ultimate happiness. Now, this is an interesting point to reflect upon an important question, which is one that comes up quite often, like with our students at Zaytuna College, for instance. You have a lot of people will say, okay, you're studying what at Zaytuna College? You're studying the liberal arts. And so often people ask the question, okay, well, what can you do with that? What kind of job can you get with that? And I would say, of course, you can get a lot of different jobs with it, or rather, it equips you to be effective and pursue excellence in a lot of different jobs, right? But then again, this is not about talking about Zaytuna, but the fundamental idea of this of being that people should only go to school for things that are going to help them become very rich. Now, there's still an opportunity for people to do that, even if they get a proper Islamic education, right? Regardless of where they get their education, right? But often we will neglect our Islamic education, thinking that pursuing a good job is going to be the path to our happiness, only to find that so many people actually abandon the focus on their Islamic education or getting a good foundation in Islamic education, end up leaving Islam or living a life of corruption, right? And so what's the point of that if you lose your soul in the process of gaining all the dunya, and so this basically, I would say, is the fundamental message that he's transmitting here, is that, and again, that's not to say that we should abandon the pursuit of dunya, but it's that to understand that we should have a very good foundation and with respect to our faith prior to any of those things, if we were going to pursue the dunya. But even when we pursue the dunya, that is something should not be sort of part. It should not, the dunya should not be in our hearts. It should not be in our hearts. So he goes on, he says, فَيَا مَنْ كُلُّ لَحْظِهِ إِلَى هَذَا يَجْرِي وَفِعْلُهُ فِعْلُ مَا لَا يَفْهَمُ وَلَا يَجْرِي. And so for ye whose every glance to this, it flows, or it has yaman kullu lahdihi la hada yasri wa fi'luhu fi'lu ma la yajri. In other words, he who witnesses all of these things, whose actions don't truly understand and know what these things truly mean. In other words, you see the death of these people. You see those people who actually amass wealth in this life only to have it taken away by others, or is only to pass away before you're able to enjoy it, right? So you, meaning me and you, who see all of these things happen, but our actions indicate that we don't truly understand the meaning of such things. As I mentioned the other day, quite often you go to a funeral, and Muslims are sitting around and gathered around the grave, and they're cracking jokes and they're laughing, not realizing that this very person we just knew and talked to the day before is now being placed into the earth. And so, as if it doesn't register with us that eventually that's going to be me, right? So I should be prepared to go. And so he says, وَكَيْفَ تَنَامُ الْعَيْنُ وَهِيَ قَرِيرَةٌ وَلَمْ تَدْرِي مِنْ أَيِّ الْمَحَلَّيْنِ تَنْزِلُ. He says, so how is it that an eye could sleep while it is comforted and not know which of the two places it shall descend? Right? In other words, we don't know if you're going to end up in Jannah or end up in the fire. Right? So that's basically come from poetry. Then in the next section, it reads in the title, في أن السلامة راهينة بتجنب مواضع الفتن. So this is something we actually did read last week as well, that safety itself, it is mortgaged by the avoidance of the places of tribulation. ومن قارب الفتنة بعدت عنه السلامة. And so whoever is close to the place of fitna or tribulation, safety is far away from him. ومن ادعى الصبر وكل إلى نفسه. Anyone claims the station of patience, he will be left to his own reliance. ورب نظرة لم تناظر وحق الأشياء بالضبط بقهر اللسان والعين. Right, and so many a glance or many a glance actually doesn't take the right lesson, right? وحق الأشياء, and the most deserving of things to actually discipline and to subdue are the tongue and the eye. فإياك أن تغتر بعزمك على ترك الهوى مع مقاربة الفتنة. So beware that to be deluded by your resolve to abandon your lust while being close to a place of tribulation. And so, an example I gave of this last week was like someone who's trying to stop smoking cigarettes, for instance, yeah, but still spends all of his time in the company of people who smoke cigarettes. So I made the decision to stop yesterday, but now I'm in the company of people who smoke cigarettes. Or I make the decision to stop messing around and committing and being involved myself with illicit intercourse, but I go to the club where I find the opposite sex, or I commit to abandoning drinking wine, and then I still go to the bar, right? I say, I'm not drinking today, but you're going to still hang out in the bar, right? So it doesn't make sense, that you would say, okay, well, listen, I'm strong enough. The average person is not strong enough. You want to stay away from things. Because the lust itself is mischievous. It is deceitful. وكم من شجاع في صف الحرب اغتيل فأتاه ما لم يحتسب ممن يأنف النظر إليه. So how often that we've noticed a brave soldier, right, on a battlefield was actually assassinated, and things happened to him he didn't expect from people that he holds in disdain, right? So he mentioned the example of Hamza and Wahshi, for example. Of course, it is not to belittle Hamza radiallahu an, nor actually to belittle Wahshi, who actually became Muslim, as we know. So then the next section, I believe this is really the true section, the new section for this particular lesson. So as في عقوبات أهل العلم والزهد. So this section pertains to the punishments of the scholars and the people of piety, right? The people of the scholars and people of piety, the punishments, right, that they themselves receive. So he said, أعظم العقوبات ألا يحسب معاقب بالعقوبة. First, he said the greatest of all punishments is for the one being punished not to even feel the punishment. So the punishment itself is generally expected to be a corrective to one's behavior, right? But if a person is punished and doesn't feel like they're being punished, then this itself is probably the worst of all punishments. And of course, it's interesting that you find in certain of the Nordic countries, they have these really crazy prisons where a murderer will murder someone, and then they put him in this lavish prison in which he's able to pretty much enjoy the entire estate move around, be in the jacuzzi, exercise, eat fine dining, among other things. So it's, well, just imagine that. We had all the prisons are like that, as we find in these countries in Europe. Just really sort of this outrageous examples of this. But basically, he starts off in saying this: the worst punishment that one can receive is that one doesn't feel the punishment when one is being punished. وَأَشَدُّ مِنْ ذَلِكَ أَنْ يَقَعَ السُّرُورُ بِمَا هُوَ عُقُوبَةٌ. Then he said, well, even worse than that, more intense than that, is for one to actually be happy with being punished. Right? So I actually know I'm being punished. Of course, I don't feel the punishment, or I can be happy about being punished. كَالْفَرَحِ بِالْمَالِ حَرَامِ وَالتَّمَكُّنِ مِنَ الذُّنُوبِ. And that is like being happy about acquiring haram property, and also indulging in sin. So I said that's the worst that one can be in, state one can be in, is that I'm happy to commit sin. I'm happy to steal wealth from people. I'm happy that I'm being punished for those things. And anyone in such a state shall not achieve anything from obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you take refuge in Allah, that He never places us in that state, because being cursed by God is a real thing. So many of us can reflect upon the times in our lives when we thought we were guided, when we were misguided, only to, later to be awakened to the realization that you are actually misguided, and this is how, and this is why. And then we make or take corrective measures to improve our lives. And then we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He awakened us to those things. But there's still some people who don't realize that they are misguided, right? And so we may decide that these are sort of the sort of people that we want to cut off our ties with them, and some of them may be happy. Okay, no problem. You don't want to hang out with me anymore. You think you're better than we are. No, I'm good. I'm good. No problem. Then he goes and he says, وَإِنِّي تَدَبَّرْتُ أَحْوَالَ أَكْثَرِ الْعُلَمَاءِ مُتَزَهِّدِينَ فَرَأَيْتُهُمْ فِي عُقُوبَاتٍ لَا يَحِسُّونَ بِهَا وَمُعْظَمُهَا مِنْ قِبَلِ طَلَبِهِمْ للرياسة فالعالم منهم يغضب إن رد عليه خطأه والواعظ مصنع بوعظه ومتزهد منافق أو مراء. Right, and so this is like something that people like Abdurrahman ibn Jawzi does in a number of his books. He takes a critical look at the ulama, and he places the magnifying glass upon them and offers criticism. And see, the ulama are supposed to be the heirs of the prophets. But like any human being, the ulama can be afflicted as well by the same pathologies or we saw the vices that the average person is afflicted with. Now, what's interesting about sort of psychology, or modern psychology, is that one would tell you that in psychology we focus on what are called pathologies, right? So in one sense, one can think about them in kind of like addictive behaviors or harmful behaviors that one become involved in. But pathologies are just one aspect of a human being. Typically they're related to, I guess you'd say, the different types of appetites that we have, right? And so psychology tries to help people sort of deal with those problems. And I guess some have the intention to ultimately cure people, even though people are typically not cured when they actually go see psychiatrists and psychologists. But one thing which is very common among psychiatrists themselves and psychologists, I would say, and this is the same problem we find among like Muslim scholars, religious scholars, is that there's a tendency to only see the patient as someone who has a problem, that's someone who needs help. No, because even the individuals who are trying to help those people have their own issues. And those are typically what we call sort of the problems or faults of the will, right? Because we think of like the human powers, there's the will and then there's the lust, right? Or anger itself can be things that's our emotions, our appetites, our lust, our emotions, our thoughts, right? We have the sins of the will and sins of the emotions, sins of the appetite. So like scholars and people who are teachers or helpers, like a psychiatrist, have the tendency to commit uh, sins of the will, right? In other words, we may hold people in disdain. We may be arrogant. We may be narcissistic. We may be interested in status and pursue status too much, right? The pursuit of status, according to the Sufis, is the most difficult of all of the vices to get rid of, because every human being loves to be pampered. Everyone loves to be treated like a special person, right? We all love that, right? And we may find that much more among like learned people or people who are involved with some type of profession, and they're seen as people who are available to help others, right? Because doctors can be very arrogant, right? So here I'm kind of giving you context before I translate this, so we can see sort of parallels between here. So he's talking about religious scholars, but I don't want you to think that this is a problem only with religious scholars, right? So this is why I have this sort of introduction to the translation of what I'm going to read right now. So he goes on, he says, if I were to reflect upon the cases of the majority of the scholars and the mutazahideen. So the mutazahid is a word which means one who's attempting to disavow the world, some who's attempting to show indifference towards the world. So he uses mutazahid as opposed to zahid, because the zahid is a person who has properly disavowed the world, who has lost all attachment to the world. So you find terms like mutasawwifa. There's a Sufiya, but then there's mutasawwifa. So the Sufis, and then we have those who are either trying to become Sufis or the pretentious Sufis. Like even with Salafiya, you have mutamaslifa, the Salafis, and then you have these so-called Salafis, right? So a Zahid is one who disavows the world, who has given up all attachments to the world. Then you have the mutazahid, who's an individual who's trying to disavow the world or is pretentiously disavowing the world. They're pretending that they disavow the world, right? So he says, okay, if I were to think about the conditions of the majority of the scholars and those who are attempting to disavow the world, then I notice is that they are all being punished in ways where they themselves, they don't even feel it or seem to feel or experience the punishment. And most of that occurs from the standpoint of them seeking positions of status. They're seeking status. Their pursuit of status itself is a punishment, right? The scholar among them becomes angry anytime his error is pointed out to him. The lecturer is actually involved in pretentious actions during his lecture, right? And some of us may have noticed this. We may see this quite often too. There are some people who are like very good speakers, right? But sometimes they go a little bit over the top. It's like exaggerated, and that one can get the impression that, this person may not be sincere in that particular I don't know, whatever that antic was that they shown, so it's musanna, right? Biwa'dihi. So a person, may do something, cry or make change the intonation of their voices to affect the crowd. Very effective, very rhetorically effective people, right? But they may actually may not actually be sincere, right, in their own reaction. They're doing it to have a certain effect on the audience. So he said, and he says that the individual who's attempting to disavow the world is a hypocrite or a show-off. A hypocrite or a show-off, right? So again, he's been very critical of these type of people, because the ulama, you have those who actually study the The outward sciences. The zahid is the person of inward reality, of the inward study of the heart, right? It's supposed to be. So it says you have a problem with both of them. It says that, but both are actually seeking status, right? So why do people do this thing? Why are these antics there? Why? Because they're trying to appeal to an audience. They're trying to be invited again to a conference or whatever it may be, things like that. So it's like, well, that this is something that they do. People do this quite often, seeking a particular type of status as opposed to, again, just being genuine, right? Right. I have to be entertaining, right? And we need good speakers. I'm not trying to, don't misunderstand me. We need good orators. A good oratory is good, right? Is important, right? But I do think that there's a lot of people who actually are good orators or became good orators so that they can find access to certain types of audiences, for the purpose of the pursuit of status. And so this is something that the ulama suffer from perhaps more than a lot of others. Excuse me. And there's a lot of jealousy between people who are learned people. فَأَوْلُ أُقُوبَاتِهِمْ إِعْرَاضُهُمْ عَنْ الْحَقِّ شُكْرًا بِالْخَلْقِ. So he says the first of their punishments is that they themselves are turned away from the truth. And by the truth, he means they're turning away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and preoccupying themselves with the creation. So that in itself is his own punishment. In other words, you say what you believe the crowd wants to hear. You say what you believe what the crowd wants to hear. You never go against the grain. You let the tail wag the dog, that as a leader that you're supposed to try to offer guidance to the masses, to the mob, that you should not, like sometimes when people talk about, okay, well, this individual is the alim, this is from the scholar, this is the ulama of the sultan. The ulama of the sultan. They say, okay, mashallah, okay, yes, the ulama of the sultan. Why? Well, because he goes and he sits with the kings, and the governors and things like that. But what about the ulama of the masses, the ulama of the mob, right? But about those people, right? I mean, that in itself is not a praiseworthy station to be in either. Islam is not opposed to scholars spending time in the presence of governors and presidents and kings and trying to offer them advice and counsel, right? Right. Islam is not a religion of anarchy. Islam actually believes or promotes the idea that there must be a head of state, right? So there are two ways about this, right? So you could, yes, ulama of sultan. What about ulama of the ghawgha, of the mass of the amma, right? So in other words, where you fundamentally that you take a pulse of the community to see where they are, and then you move in whatever direction you believe that community is going in. And that in itself is not a very healthy thing to do, because what happens in a couple of years when the community decide to move in a different direction, right? And so the Quran even warns us against this, about following the majority of the people, right? That if you were to follow the majority of humanity, then they would mislead you away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the ulama are supposed to be the heirs of the prophets, right? And the heirs of the prophets, they speak the truth regardless of how the masses are willing to take it, right? The masses may not accept it at first, but if the masses are people who actually want to be in conformity with the guidance and wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they will embrace the wisdom eventually, inshallah, right? So this is really amazing. Like, so he's like, okay, the first punishment of the ulama and the mutazahidun is that they are actually turning away from God and actually are being preoccupied by the creation. So they would rather obey the creation than obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ومن خفي عقوباتهم سلب حلاوة المناجاة ولذة التعبد. It said, and one of the subtle punishments that they are afflicted with is they become stripped of the sweetness of divine communion and the pleasure that comes with the service and worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? In other words, those individuals, perhaps they don't spend much time involved in extra prayer or making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on a regular basis, right? And praying tahajjud, among other things, things like that. So things that are special types of worship. And so he says basically, excuse me, the sweetness of those things is removed from those people, right? So they don't do a lot of extra, right? Except for some believing men and some believing women. And Allah utilizes those people to protect the earth. These are the people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they utilize them to protect the earth. بَوَاطِنُهُمْ كَظَوَاهِرِهِمْ. Their inward states is just the same as their outward states. بَلْ أَجْلَى. Rather, their inward states is even more manifest than their outward states are. وَسَرَائِرُهُمْ كَعَلَانِيَتِهِمْ بَلْ أَحْلَى. And their again, their hearts, like what is within their hearts, and they hold it, is the same as what is public knowledge. He said, rather, even sweeter than that. وَهِمَمُهُمْ عِنْدَ ثُرَيَّا بَالْأَعْلَى. And their zeal, it is connected with the Pleiades. In other words, they have high zeal, that they aim high, right? Rather, higher than even the Pleiades. إِنْ عُرِفُوا تَنَكَّرُوا. If they are noticed, they try to hide, right? They sort of, try not to be acknowledged, right? So in other words, when people notice who they are, they try themselves to to be subtle, right, and sort of unnoticed, right? As opposed to the opposite of that. When people acknowledge them or notice them and say, okay, well, yeah, they feel special, right? And they are special in one sense, but the idea is that, okay, you should be always humble, that you should understand that is to be a test, that fame itself is a test. Status is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِن رُؤِيَتْ لَهُمْ كَرَامَةٌ أَنْكَرُوا. And if there happens to be a marvel that manifests itself on their hands, they themselves will deny that it had anything to do with who they are. In other words, there's a miracle. A person may have a miracle manifest from them. Their state, they type of people, if there's these people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala utilizes to protect the earth, they themselves, they deny that such things were because of them. فَالنَّاسُ فِي غَفَلَاتِهِمْ فَالنَّاسُ فِي غَفَلَاتِهِمْ وَهُمْ فِي قَطْعِ فَلَاتِهِمْ. So he said, so the people are involved, or all the people are in the state of heedlessness, where they themselves, meaning these people, these ulama, real scholars, real zuhad, people who renounce the world, they themselves, they are involved with traversing their desert. In other words, traversing the desert of the dunya, right? Trying to seek the akhirah. تُحِبُّهُمْ بِقَاءُ الْأَرْضِ وَتَفْرَحُ بِهِمْ أَفْلَاكُ السَّمَاءِ. He said both the places, all the locations on the earth, they love these people. The land, the earth itself, they love these people. And the aflak as-sama, the constellations in the sky, they are happy with them. They are happy with these people. نسأل الله عز وجل التوفيق لاتباعهم وأن يجعلنا من أتباعهم. And we ask Allah to grant us the tawfiq to follow them and to make us among their followers, and to make them amongst their followers. So as he makes this special dua at the end of that particular section. So extremely important section, right? So this again, Sayyid al-Khatir, hunting for thoughts, hunting for ideas, right? That's fundamentally what this book is called. Then he goes on and he says, في أن علو الهمة من كمال العقل. So in this section is entitled having an exalted fervor or having high zeal is a sign of perfect intelligence. Having high zeal is a sign of having perfect intelligence. So he goes on, he said, من علامة كمال العقل علو الهمة والراضي بالدون دني. Says that a sign of a perfect intellect, or again, perfect intelligence, is to have high zeal. Of course, high zeal for lofty things, for ibadah, for charity, for all the things that Allah and His Messenger call us to do. وَالرَّاضِ بِالدُّونِ دَنِيٌّ. And so, and those who are satisfied with base things is a base person. Those who are satisfied with base things is a base person, an ignoble person. Those who have high zeal are noble people. Those who have low zeal or actually don't want to pursue the right things, then those things are those people are despicable. وَلَمْ أَرَى فِي عُيُوبِ النَّاسِ عَيْبًا كَنَقْصِ الْقَادِرِينَ عَلَى التَّمَامِ. So he quotes, or he makes a line of poetry. He says, and I've never seen among the signs of people a flaw which is equal or equivalent to the the uh the lack of perfection, or rather the decision not to seek perfection by those who are able to pursue perfection. In other words, mediocrity. So mediocrity itself, he said, I haven't seen a flaw in a person worse than this, is mediocrity. You have the opportunity to do better, but you choose to remain average or to even be below average, right? So in other words, so a sign of perfect intelligence is to have high zeal when it comes to so many different things. When it comes to seeking knowledge, when it comes to your worship, and sometimes even in pursuit of your dunya, if your intention is to utilize the dunya for your akhirah, right? So that's a sign of perfect intellect. And to be totally honest, when it comes to the fundamental question of intelligence, what we find even in the Quran, it alludes to this idea that intelligence can be measured. Intelligence can be measured, right? So there's something in the Quran or a certain classification of person called the Sufaha, which we typically translate as fools. As-safaha is foolishness. Now, the safi in Islamic law is a term utilized to refer to a spendthrift. So a person is not good at managing income and expenditures, you become sufaha, you become safi, you become a fool, or a person who is classified as a fool, right? So the way that the ancients used to measure intelligence were by three fundamental things. One was, well, how well you produced and managed your wealth. Secondly, they determined it or measured it on the basis of how well you were able to manage the kingdom. If, in other words, how good of a politician you were, how savvy and shrewd of a politician you were. And then thirdly, how good of a military strategist you were, right? So military strategy, politics, and wealth management. Those are three fundamental ways they would judge how intelligent a person was, or how lower or of less intelligence a person was. And I think we can say the same thing about people today. So in that sense, those people who actually become wealthy, right? Of course, if it's based upon their own sort of effort and the ingenuity and their planning, right? Of course, everyone becomes wealthy. They help. I mean, they get help from other people, right? That they have their friends and they help them. I'll give an example of this. I would say with someone like Jeff Bezos, for example, right? I don't want to use the example of Zuckerberg, because we know that he stole the idea from these twins, right, about Facebook, right? But Jeff Bezos, right? He created Amazon. He creates this vast network of businesses, a marketplace, a digital marketplace that businesses are now, you order something like right now, sometimes you can get it in the same day, or you can get it tomorrow, right? To me, Jeff Bezos is one of the most intelligent people on the planet, because of that. Now, of course, intelligence also includes, you embracing, believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because so if you don't believe in God, that the Quran is very clear that this itself is a sign of a lack of intelligence, right? To reject God, right? To lack intelligence. But at any rate, so this is fundamentally, so when he says that having high zeal, right, against someone like Jeff Bezos, I would say was a person of high zeal when it came to dunya. That's why he was able to achieve as much as he did. The same thing with the founder of Apple will be an example of that too, right? So these are people who actually worked very hard to get what they have. And then perhaps maybe 1 or 2 sections, and then we'll conclude for the day. So the next section he entitles, or is entitled, في عظيم فضل الله ومنته على عباده. So Allah's enormous bounty and blessing over humanity, right? So he says, Subhana man sabaqat mahabbatuhu li'ahbabihi, فمدحهم على ما وهب لهم واشترى منهم ما أعطاهم وقدم متأخرا من أوصافهم لموضع إثارهم فباح بهم في صومهم وأحب خلوف أفواههم. Right, so it's really amazing stuff here, right? So سبحان من سبقت محبته لأحبابه. Glory be to He whose love preceded to His beloved. فَمَدَحَهُمْ عَلَى مَا وَهَبَ لَهُمْ. And then He praised them in light of what He actually gave to them. وَاشْتَرَى مِنْهُمْ مَا أَعْطَاهُمْ. And then He purchased from them the same thing that He gave to them. وَقَدَّمَ مُتَأَخِّرًا مِنْ أَوْصَافِهِمْ لِمَوْضِعِ إِثَارِهِمْ. And He placed the last of their characteristics first, due to the place of their preference. In other words, because of His preference for those people, right? In other words, one way you can see it is that people, we typically judge people by the way they look or their apparent status or their class, they're rich or they're poor, things like that. But your iman, is perhaps maybe listed lastly as one of your characteristics, right? Because if I say, well, okay, describe yourself, right? A lot of people say, yeah, I'm a Muslim person, right? But typically most people will start with, okay, what I am, my gender, my race, my status, things like that, my nationality, those type of things, right? فَبَاهَ بِهِمْ فِي صَوْمِهِمْ, right? And then He actually went out and He boasted about their fasting, and He actually loved the smell of their mouths or their breaths, when they're fast, right? So in other words, is okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us everything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided us to Islam, right? And that itself was out of love. Then He made us the people of His love through the guidance of Islam. In other words, it wasn't because of us. We said that, alhamdulillah alladhi hadana li hadha wa ma kunna nahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. That praise be to Allah who guided us, and we would not have been guided had it not been for Allah's guiding us, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided us to something He loves and made us His beloved because of us, not because of anything that we have done, right? And then He praised us for doing things, or rather, He praised us for giving charity, even though it is the wealth that we have is something that He gave to us, right? So He praised us for giving away the things that He gave to us, right? Allah controls the food, the growth of it, everything in the earth, all the things that are of value in the earth come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even if human beings, they involve themselves in some type of industry and then they bring together and synthesize certain natural ingredients, ultimately everything originates from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one would not be able to create something new, right? So Allah praises us for giving away the things that He gave to us. And then He also buys from us the things that He gave to us. So in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اشْتَرَىٰ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُم بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةَ. That Allah, He's purchased from the believers their wealth and their selves in exchange for Jannah. Right? So everything you have is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So He basically say, okay, this is a sign of Allah's, His great favor and His great blessing, right? So I think it's probably a good place to stop. Then He finally says, يا لها من حالة مسونة لا يقدر عليها كل طالب ولا يبلغ كنها وصفها كل خاطب. Oh, what a thing there is to be in such a protected state. ولا يقدر عليها كل طالب, and not every seeker is able to achieve such a thing. ولا يبلغ كنها وصفها كل خاطب, and not every individual every addresser or person orator is able to actually proclaim or to reach the essence of such a description. In other words, the description that he just gave in the sense of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he actually blesses us for sacrificing the very things that he gave to us to benefit personally from them. At any rate, so we can pause there for today. And inshallah on Wednesday, inshallah, once again at 2 o'clock, we'll resume these lessons, inshallah. So if there are any questions, then please, I have time to offer maybe answer a couple questions. If there are not any questions, same as well. I'm fine with that, but maybe I'll give you a second, inshallah. Bismillah. All right. Okay. Well, looks like we have no questions, and so really do thank you for tuning in. And until Wednesday, 2 o'clock, once again, Pacific Standard Time. Please do support Lamppost Education Initiative. Please donate generously to us. We're like everyone else. We're trying to raise funds during this month. They really are very, very helpful to our efforts. And we really do thank all of you who've been helping us over the years to stay afloat. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala magnify your charity and your benefits from your charity, and magnify the benefit from yourselves as well. And barakallahu feek wa sallallahu sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.